Hello there and welcome to the Studio Roundtable on how IT should power business innovation. I'm Doug Drinkwater, I'm the Director of Strategy here at Hot Topics, and I'm joined today by an experienced panel of technology leaders as we discuss how IT takes a proactive role in driving business change through technology, how they balance agility and speed with the business as usual, and ultimately how IT underpins and empowers business innovation. Guys, not a lot to talk about in the next 30 to 45 minutes. Dave, let me come to you first of all. What does innovation in simple terms mean to you?
I think innovation covers so many different areas. There's so many different types of innovation. So for me, depending on which part of my team I'm working with, it can be disruptive innovation, where we're creating new products and services as part of our digital products and solutions that we offer to our clients. Or it can be more sustaining innovation, where we're working and looking at new ways and how we can improve our efficiency and effectiveness as a business as well. So it really depends on which lens you're looking through, where we get involved with innovation.
Thomas, what about yourself?
Innovation is fundamentally, firstly, about change, but it's delivering change for the better. And talking outside of the IT world, what is innovation? Well, obviously, the Wright brothers were innovators. And what do? They tinkered in their bike shop until they were actually able to create powered flight. And say Howard Hughes, he'd be another innovator. He had a problem when he was building this massive aeroplane called the Spruce Goose. And he had a problem. The ailerons could not be controlled with wires. And so his innovation was to create hydraulics. So basically, what does innovation do? There metaphorically, and literally making your business take flight. It's making you perhaps move up to the top right of the Gartner, fly up to the top right of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, but it's putting some clear airspace between you and the competition.
And Ian, how do you see the term innovation from your view?
So I'll put it in an IT context, given my background. So I think the one thing you can say, which is the truism about innovation, is it is here to stay. 88% of our customers say that digital disruption is a part of their business. And we sort of look at it from two components. One is innovation from an IT perspective out to their customers. So if I give you an example, it could be a simple thing like how you provide video collaboration into a contact center so that you can bring a mortgage advisor to the customer at the point in time the customer wants that service, but also making your business more efficient in the utilization of your most experienced talent. So that's sort of like a simple example of the customer-facing piece. But there's also an innovation piece that sits right underneath how IT operates day to day. And that manifests itself in many ways, and it can be around how we look at visibility of very complex application environments that we have today, where we're pulling data from SaaS providers, from data within our own data centers and within our own applications, and making sure that customer experience never fails, so that when you actually come to do something, that experience is seamless, and we see that fault or that issue at the point in time it occurs. So I'd sort of look at it from both sides. It's revenue and value out to the customer, but it's also making IT just more efficient by doing things better.
Dave, we've just spoke about different definitions for innovation. There's business innovation and there's the IT impact, both externally and internally. I guess something we've spoken about over the last 3 to 5 years is the different levels of IT driving that business innovation in terms of people, process, products. How do you see, we've got a sea change there now in terms of IT actually leading that business transformation or having at least a very strong say and influence?
Well, they are. I think it's also what's your definition of IT, and in many organizations, we take more of a holistic view of technology. So we've got people involved in digital development, we've got people involved in running the business in IT, we've got business experience teams, we've got innovation groups, all working together as part of the same ecosystem and driving innovation, but with slightly different agendas. So depending on what your focus is, the type of innovation that you're getting involved in is going to be different. But I think IT for me is really about bringing together the subject matter experts that you have within your organization, and bringing that cutting edge technology that you've got as your solutions, so you can actually enable the vision of that innovation for others. So I think it's really important for IT to be part of that conversation, part of that discussion, and part of that group helping to drive change, as Thomas has said.
Do you not find, and we see it a lot with our customers, that a lot of the IT organization is very heavily oriented around operations. So, whether it be application maintenance or it's running the infrastructure, which is a big, those two pieces are a big slice of the overall spend of the organization. That talent doesn't naturally lend itself to innovation. Do you see that as an issue of how you bring people to be more business relevant as opposed to operationally oriented?
It's definitely a mindset. Yeah, so I agree with that. But one of the things I think I always talk about is you need to make room for innovation to occur. So you need to enable people to think differently, and that could be business process innovation, for example. How can you do things differently? What you don't want to be in a position where you're using technology to enable manual processes and replicate them in exactly the same way. That isn't really providing a huge amount of innovation. It's good use of technology, but it may not be innovation in that respect. So it's perhaps thinking about things in a different way. How can technology be that enabler to really rethink how our business processes work?
Just on that word enabler, you used a few times said, Dave. I mean, Ian, how do you see that with your customers in terms of IT actually, or depending on definition, being that enabler to the business? Because we've heard a lot, especially through the pandemic, of that actually happening, but it does differ widely by company size, vertical that you're in as well.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think there's a temptation to look at enablers as sort of short, sharp innovation projects like the killer app, for example. But for businesses like ours and for our large enterprise customers, actually the enablers come from the foundational platforms like ERP. So to give you an example, we all had a little hiccup with supply chain over the pandemic period. We had to completely re-architect a number of our product lines to swap out semiconductors, which was probably the biggest shortage area that existed. If we hadn't have had that supply chain knowledge and that data collected as to how we were using those components and how we could compare them to alternate sort of vendors, we would never have been able to make those changes in the time periods that we made them. We were compressing product development times from 18 months to single-digit months. So for us, and that enablement, a lot of it is the core data in our ERP platforms that actually allows us to do different things as opposed to just veneer applications on top.
Thomas, what's your thoughts in terms of that enablement in the business?
IT, I guess, is at the very heart of innovation in the modern world from a business perspective, and you've got the enablement of innovation from within the organization, and when you develop and invent and create IP, if that is at the core of what you do, or you, as it were, insource it. And so you need to find how companies innovate and how they're going to actually add value, add competitive advantage. And then it comes back to the very interesting area of, there's the business as usual. IT, people use that horrible phrase, the plumbing, but actually it's how you do that can either transform the ability of the business to innovate because you're delivering a seamless IT service with the best tools and technology to enable your business, even from a generic day-to-day perspective, to perform and outperform. And innovation in that area is around process and around technology and around the best service providers, all having the best internal teams. And then there's the process of going around insourcing technology from external providers. How do you actually benchmark them? How do you know what they do and how do they do it differently and better?
Dave, I want to come on to, you mentioned about different types of IT, which I think is truism, isn't it really? But does IT have a branding problem in a sense that IT has been historically seen as more back office? And we obviously, again, last few years, we've seen a number of CIOs and CTOs in particular have rebranded their department, which may seem a bit of a pointless exercise, but actually it changes the perception of that business unit within the organisation and what its capabilities are. Does that need to be, is that an area where a quick win that you can actually show that IT can do more than just the plumbing, keeping the lights on?
Absolutely. I think it's obviously that the plumbing, the operational side of IT is critical to running the business. But to your point about it being a back office function, that back room stigma almost that has come from historically from IT, I think we've got to change that by actually getting in front of the rest of the wider business that you work with, partnering with that part of different parts of the business to understand what are those requirements, what are those challenges that they're facing, and between understanding those challenges, you can use a technology lens to actually look at where we can try and change it, where technology can improve that process and perhaps even completely disrupt it as well. So I think a lot of it is going to be about those really valuable and rich conversations with your business partners to understand really what they're trying to achieve. What's the business outcome?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's one part which we haven't really talked about. It's, when you identify the change that needs to happen, then innovation that needs to be implemented within an organization, how do you do it? And it depends what you're doing. It could be, as it were, business as usual ERP, or it could actually be architecting, implementing a new system. But the thing which is so important is the cultural change. If you don't manage the cultural change, if you don't bring people along with the journey, if you don't train them effectively, then you will not actually succeed in your goals. And it is making, and from a cultural perspective, it's about being polite, empowering people, and letting them feel confident enough to express their opinions when they think that you're maybe going wrong or having the wrong opinion. There needs to be an element of direction, but there has to be absolute respect across the team and listening to everyone's voice, letting them be engaged. And also to have fun. At the end of the day, life's short. You create an environment where people can actually enjoy coming into the office every day.
You've got to create those opportunities where people understand the benefit and will actually be willing to invest and put the budget there for you to do that innovation. So they actually realizing the benefits that come back from it. But that all comes from articulating that story, telling the story and getting that across is so important.
I think that investment piece is important as well, because I think there's this assumption that IT is a free vend, and IT can just afford to innovate and afford to invest in the talent that you talked about as well, which is very true. And the reality is that majority of the money goes elsewhere. It goes into operations. So I think being able to, especially from a CTO, CIO perspective, being able to balance how I take cost out of operations and fund that investment, that's where the business starts to pay attention, because you're now actually putting wood behind the arrow. There's talent, there's dedicated people, there's development platforms, there's data that's made available. All of those things cost money, right? Yeah. So it's a people and a financial component that I think makes a difference.
And and also, as you mentioned, it's to do with articulating the story, and the story has a beginning, middle, and end. And the end of the story is about the vision, the ROI, and the actual return. And I guess in terms of authority from a boardroom perspective, the CIO, the board level, it is a question of track record. And as your track record grows in terms of what you deliver, then your authority grows, and therefore your leverage grows within, and then the ability of IT to work properly as a single unit within the business, rather than seeing, as it were, something behind a wall and in a silo. That's when IT actually delivers properly to the business.
The storytelling is very interesting, isn't it? I attended a conference, and I won't name the analyst, but let's just say that they refer that CIOs need to communicate like hostage negotiators, which I thought was an interesting way of communicating with your line of business peers. Ian, just coming on that kind of budget note you mentioned, obviously there are constraints at the moment, but I guess on the flip side, we are seeing increasingly technology budgets sitting outside of technology, right, into different line of business departments. So I guess in a way, there's a slight challenge there of how you get, as CIOs, get your arms around all of this without constricting where the business wants to go.
Yeah, and I think that is a reality now. But the other part of it is that those two things are never independent of each other. So every investment that the line of business makes or the business makes in technology always has an impact on IT. And one of the examples I've seen with one of the big Canadian banks was they gave free rein to the business to go out and invest in SaaS platforms to enhance their service offerings back to their customers. But that had a huge impact on data, where data was stored and where it was moved to and from, and that cost money. But even down to the basic plumbing topic we talked about before, every time they connected in, there were circuits going into those providers, which then had to be managed by IT. And it was adding literally tens of thousands of dollars of cost every time one of those was added, which the line of business never saw. And IT sort of received still within the constraints of their operating budgets. So I think no matter where the investment, the front end investment's going, it's essential that IT and the line of business from a technology point of view are looking at the complete picture of what the implications of everything that happens, rather than operating independently. That's sort of mine.
And absolutely, and that was an example of an internal project where they hadn't actually brought IT into the discussion, and therefore the costs rocketed because there was a whole load of unfactored in costs. And the interesting thing is also when you're doing an implementation of innovation using an external provider, you absolutely have to factor in all elements that need to support that implementation and innovation. So it's the end-to-end exercise. And then otherwise, if you don't factor in the change management and the communications and all the attendant technologies which might be brought in, but also there's the thing is you might have a choice between two technology service providers, one both effectively doing the same thing, but one actually has a super lean, super smart way of implementing, therefore far less cost, and the other one, actually is the most poorly constructed deployment process you could possibly imagine. And even though the pricing from a face value perspective looks the same, you go with the wrong one and you find you've actually burnt yourself a bit because it's cost far more than it should have done.
I think that's where we look at those blue ocean strategies, where we take a investment into almost looking at what could be a startup and investing small amounts of money to begin with and helping that grow. But in that sort of almost that MVP model, fail fast way of working, you don't spend a lot of time and therefore a lot of resource and money on something if it's not going the way you want it to go. So I think it's being clever about where you put the investment and knowing not every time your innovation isn't always going to hit the jackpot. You're not going to be successful. Sometimes it does fail.
And that's the thing which everybody says failure is good. No. Failure is actually disastrous. Don't fail. We don't want you to fail. That's not why we're in business. But experimentation is essential. And experimentation involves successful tests and unsuccessful tests. And the MVP, and so, one needs to be clear about what we're talking about. And of course, invention and experimentation is at the very heart of innovation. So, yeah, I mean, it's something which grates me, the fact that everybody says failure is good. No, failure is not good. And actually, there's huge satisfaction to be done from actually implementing an IT project correctly, keeping everybody involved from the beginning to the end, knowing about errors or problems when they occur, and then mitigating and resolving them. And it is possible, and it should happen. And the idea of saying, we've just spent a huge amount of money on a program that's gone wrong, but we learned something. No. That doesn't work. It doesn't rub. And if you built a house and the house falls down, failure's not good. No, you should know how to build a house. Same with an IT program. Failure's not good. You should know how to implement and look after the soft as well as the hard things, and then you have a high chance of success. Of course, with the best will in the world, programs can always fail, but it's not a good thing.
But that cooperative piece is important. But otherwise, in the examples we talked about, the IT just looks like it's a break. So we're going to give you the 10 reasons why things can't be done unless you're in on it right from the get-go.
Yeah. On the flip side of that experimentation, though, obviously economic downturn, we are hearing some CIOs and CTOs in particular seeing that kind of pressure on return on investment. So I guess there's a limit, isn't there, in terms of how much stuff you can spin up, and it's not you haven't got kind of open world to anything here. There are pressures on there.
Well, that's why there's different staggered levels of funding that comes available. So you're given a relatively small amount of money to start with, and see how that goes, and if it progresses, and if it's got commercialization or business opportunities to drive it forward, then keep on investing in it. If it isn't going to go anywhere, then you stop, and don't keep on plowing money into something that's isn't going to work.
The thing we do on the other side of what you say, Dave, is we work with customers over a sort of 18-month, 2.5 year sort of time frame, because too far out is too hard to predict, and people simply don't have the patience for it. But it's also very important to have the plan for how you're going to consolidate, how you're going to standardize, how you're going to automate a lot of the operational aspects of the business, so that you can see that cost coming out. And it won't happen tomorrow. It'll take 12 months to 18 months to get it out. But as it starts to come out, the place it goes is to fund those investment projects, because there's no pot of money sat somewhere which is going to be magically given to IT to fund innovation. It has to come out of the fundamentals. And if you look at how the spend sits in IT today, a good sort of 45% of the infrastructure spend is purely on operational stuff. And even on the application side, it's a 50-50 split between development and maintenance. As soon as you develop something, it's going into maintenance. So how do you get cost out of those maintenance pieces?
Yeah. And out of curiosity, just on your own at Cisco relationship with CIOs and CTOs, have you seen that kind of change or evolved into becoming more of a strategic partner? Because it sounds like there's less of that sale and more of that actually how do we partner together as organisations. Purpose comes into it as well, of course, but there's other factors at play, aren't there?
Yeah, we see it a lot more today than we did 5 years ago. And I think a lot of that's down to the technologies itself, because they are shifting and changing rapidly. And I think our customers expect, like us and all the other big players in the market, they expect us to come to the table and say, this is what we recommend you do. And here's the priorities of what you should do first, because that's really important, because no one wants to get themselves stuck in a cul-de-sac where because once you make a change in infrastructure, you're stuck with it for 5-7 years, right? So yeah, that's a big part of what we see.
Priorities then, you just mentioned that, Ian. Dave, what's your kind of priorities for the year ahead when we look at this topic of business innovation? Where are you focused? I'm sure you have a lengthy to-do list, but what's at the top of it?
And again, it does depend on the lens that you're looking at. And I actually am involved in both IT and also digital as well. So from a digital perspective, we are that disruptive innovation. We look at new products and services that we can bring to market as part of our Stantec.io platform and solution. Whereas on the IT side of things, we're looking at more automation. We as a company, Stantec does many acquisitions. So we're always looking at how we effectively integrate those businesses into the wider organisation. So a lot of that time and attention and obviously focus goes on looking at how we can make the systems unified together, and looking at where we can reduce as much manual handling as possible. So to Ian's point, around automation is critical, but we just don't want to automate a manual process to become a digital process. We want to actually look at the business process model around that and innovate on that as well, to really make sure that we're getting the most from the technology and also making the processes as efficient as possible.
We'll come on to advice for the audience in just a second, but Ian, in terms of blockers for innovation, what do you see? Is it business inertia when we look at this? Is it skill sets? Obviously talent is an issue at the moment. What do you see at Cisco?
I'd put talent at the top of the list. So not only retaining talent that you have, but also attracting the right type of talent, which is, I think, fundamentally different from an IT perspective than it has been. Traditionally, it's very, very operationally oriented, and we need a lot less of that. We need people who are much more capable, as Dave was talking about, of interacting with the business, talking about business requirements, talking about business process change in its true sense. So I would put talent at the very top of the list, and just with the amount of churn that's going on in the industry at the moment, which I think affects customers and vendors. I think it affects everybody. That lack of stability in the workforce makes innovation very difficult to see through.
And Dave, what do you see that work on blockers?
Well, I think Ian covers it really nicely there. I think it's also around going back to that, having the story, having the conversation with the rest of your business partners, people understanding what you can bring to the table. What's the art of the possible, and really enabling or being the enabler of that vision to make new things happen and create new services and create different ways of working. So it's making sure you're having those right conversations.
That leads me nicely on to the final question. What advice would you have? Obviously, many watching today will be thinking, how do they increase their influence, drive business transformation? What advice would you leave the audience with today? Dave, I'm looking at you, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, as I said at the beginning, making room for innovation is so important. It's just not going to happen by itself. So you've got to have a structure that supports innovation, that embraces it. You've got to make sure that you're understanding what the business challenges are. What are the business outcomes that you need to achieve? And by bringing all that together and then putting a tech wraparound to it, that's where great things can happen.
Yeah, I'm on the same path. I think it's essential that IT invests in innovation and is seen to invest in it. We talked about the talent bit already, but traditionally IT is seen as the constraint. So you can't do this because for security reasons or whatever it happens to be. So exposing development environments, exposing corporate data to allow the business to access that information in a safe way, and then bringing the talent with it to help them do that, I think are vital ingredients for changing the dynamic between IT and the business.
The interesting, it's being aware of opportunities out there, but also making sure that any innovation that you introduce is absolutely, as it were, locked hands with business objectives, understanding what the business needs are, and for IT to work very closely with the business. So, and that's all part of the cultural change as well, and from a ground roots up, making sure that your teams do communicate well, are supported through the transformation journey. One thing which happened this year, I had to sign a contract, and within the contract is that you will be polite to our staff. And that really underlines the process, is that if you work well with teams and you have mutual respect, you will accomplish everything that you need and you want, and people will enjoy working with you. If you actually have an environment of fear, absolute top-down hierarchy, you won't realize the innovation which you potentially can achieve.
Goes to that old saying, isn't it? People and process are often the hardest bits, actually. The technology, I'm sure it is difficult, but it seems to be that the easiest part of the puzzle. But thanks for joining me at the studio. Wonderful round table, so thanks so much for joining me today. And thanks to you viewers for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed that session, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Until next time, thanks and goodbye.